Уважаемые участники Moscow Urban Forum 2017. Мы начинаем пленарное заседание «Глобальные проекты реновации как двигатели развития городов». Модератор пленарного заседания – старший партнер McKinsey & Company Ермолай Солженицын.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, esteemed participants and guests of the Moscow Urban Forum 2017. Let us continue our plenary session dedicated to renovations, modernization and upgrading of spaces in the cities and agglomerations. And today we'd like to discuss this huge project, and I see that there are almost no vacant seats. We are going to discuss the plans of Moscow and the lessons, the experience, which could be learned from other cities. Today we are going to welcome representatives from major Asian megacities and agglomerations and from the European ones, and also other stakeholders from the economic chain. The financiers, constructors, developers would like to actually deep dive into this issue and to cover that from different sides. I'm glad to invite the participants in our today's panel discussion. Murat Husnul, Deputy Mayor of Moscow, in charge of the city building policy and construction. Alexei Dobashin, Director General of Crost Construction Company. Yasushi Aoyama, ex-Vice Governor of Tokyo and Professor from Meiji University. Fadi Jabri, Architect and Executive Director from Nikken Sekkei. Maurice Leroy, urbanist and ex-minister for city development of the so-called Big Paris. Jin Lan Yu, head of the research development of Beijing Municipal Committee for City Planning and Construction. Alexei Muratov, partner from the Design Bureau Strelka. Alexander Plutnik, Director General of the Mortgage Lending Agency. Sergei Choban, Architect and Managing Partner from Speech Bureau. And Christos Passas, Design Director of Zaha Hadid Architects. We are a little bit behind the schedule, but we'll try to be right on time. So first of all, without further ado, I would like to turn to Murat Husnulin. Mr. Husnulin, could you tell us once again, please, how this project looks like, what is going on about that, what are the main ambitions, objectives, figures? Mr. Husnulin, you must welcome. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank you as almost by the end of the day, and we are finishing our today's plenary meeting, and I don't see any vacant seats. Really would like to discuss today the following topic, what renovation is about. In Moscow, renovation is mostly associated with the renovation of housing, but I would like to extend this notion to see it as a bigger notion, because we see the following trends in the world. All the megacities, all the agglomerations are competing for the human capital within their country, and we clearly see that Moscow now acts as a magnet, attracting a lot of talents, a lot of positive people from all over the country, and a lot of foreigners are coming to us to spend vacations, to learn something, to work, and we're also learning from the people who come to us. Also, we see that the human capital in all the megacities and all the agglomerations of the world become the main competitive edge. And in order to be competitive, in order to make our city convenient for living, for work, so that you could conveniently come to visit your friends here, the mayor told us to elaborate such renovations programs which would totally renew the city environment. I'd like to brief you about what we are doing about renovation in Moscow, what we would like to learn from our colleagues, in what directions we would like to move. If you look at the screen, over the last 6 years in Moscow, we are dealing with a lot of projects. Some of the figures: we have built 50 million square meters of real estate, out of them 19 million square meters of housing. So this is 12% of the total territory of Moscow has been built over the last 6 years. We have upgraded 30% existing subway or metro, and we have increased by 12.5% the total length of all the tunnels, bridges, and other flyovers, and 28%. This is the increase of the number of the artificial buildings, and we have built more than 370 facilities of public infrastructure. On that slide, you can see the main volumes and scope of the renovation. This is about the transport infrastructure, roads, metro, crossings, the bicycle roads. This is done for the sake of making people free. Free in the broadest sense, free in terms where they move, what they can do, how they spend their free time, free in terms of culture and entertainment. And you may see 7 programs, and I would like to highlight each of them. First of all, this is about the renovation of the social infrastructure, which results in a high-quality medical care, modernization of the post-industrial territories, access to hectares of the formerly closed territory, parks and public spaces. This is what gives the residents the freedom for self-expression and other ways of spending time. Also, people may implement themselves, opt for the healthy lifestyle, which is especially important in the nowadays megacities, and convenient and affordable housing with a lot of greenery. The most acute problem of the megacity is lack of freedom of movement, the traffic jams. This is where you can spend hours, and residents have to spend months and even years of their life on moving somewhere. That's why the mayor tells us to dramatically rethink the concept of the development of the public transportation to create a single integrated network. We even agreed with the high rate of throughput capacity, which can boast high technologies. The priority for 2015-2016 was to achieve the unprecedented growth in terms of development of the infrastructure. This is what we really did. We're learning from our Korean and Chinese colleagues how to modernize our transportation system, and we can really showcase certain results. By 30%, so we increased the length of our metro lines. We have commissioned the smaller ring road, 54 kilometers, and we are building the third exchanging contour, 31 stations which are going to be commissioned by 2021. And all in all, on the map you can see all the lines of the metro which are being designed and built at the same time. But bearing in mind all our plans for until 2021, metro stations would be built to Vnukovo Airport, to Chelobityevo, and therefore actually the throughput capacity would be almost doubled, and the number of metro stations would be doubled within just several years. We continue to develop our railways together with the Russian Railways Company, or RZD. I may assure you that within the framework of the agglomeration, we built 160 kilometers of roads, and 80 kilometers more of railway lines would be built on the 3 most important radius. This is needed for the communication purposes, so that commuters can come to the city at an affordable price and without necessarily spending hours in the traffic jams. Our colleagues from Beijing have already built about 6 highway ring roads. In Moscow, we have only 4 such ring roads. Sadovaya, the third one, the Boulevard, and the big Moscow ring road. We are opting for the cord for the connection lines, which all in all will make a ring road of not a ring shape, and it will be 321 kilometers long. Now, therefore, we will take some load from the ring roads, and we have built more than 500 kilometers of roads and more than 160 artificial objects. 500 kilometers of road are going to be built in the near 2 or 3 years. We have money enough, we have budget allocated for that, we have constructors to do that, and so we have goodwill. This will result in affordability and connectivity for the city. The biggest program we have embarked on this is the development of the infrastructural and transportation hubs. We are going to build about several thousand square kilometers of facilities around the hubs in order to improve the accessibility. We are designing the volume of about 14.5 million square meters of facilities, enjoying the investments from private investors. This all allowed us to approach an absolutely new way of rethinking the industrial areas zones. So we have only 2 areas, industrial areas, and 4.7 thousand hectares are to be totally renovated, and 7.8 thousand hectares of industrial territory will be partially renovated. When we adopted the plan for this year, we took a decision that the industrial areas where the investors are going to set up jobs, the density of the development would be about 15,000 per 1 hectare, and this way we have doubled the density of the development at the industrial territories, because this is something taxable. This is where our money comes from, and the investors don't have to go anywhere in order to apply for the construction permit. Everything is done digitally. We are renovating the former car manufacturing plant, which now will be home to more than 7,000 people, and we are setting up about 60,000 jobs. And the same is true of the territory which is now occupied by Spartacus Stadium, which hosted the Confederation Football Cup. Another focus of the policentric development of Moscow is the Big Moscow project. The territory acceded to the territory of Moscow several years ago, but a lot of discussions are now in the past, and we now see that investments to the tune of $20 billion were made into the Big Moscow territory. A lot of roads and infrastructure has been built. The metro stations are being built there. We are upgrading the Kievsky destination of the Russian railways. So Big Moscow will be one of the growth points for us. Our colleagues from Beijing said that the municipal offices are located 60 kilometers away from the downtown of the city. So this is why we embarked on this project of Big Moscow. We wanted to relocate the governance center of the city away from the downtown. And our colleagues from Beijing decided to move all the offices outside of the city's downtown or city limits. I would like to tell you that dealing with those major infrastructural construction sites, we are not neglecting the social infrastructure. We have built 203 kindergartens in Moscow, and there are now queues to the kindergartens for the kids from 1 to 3 years old. We have built a lot of hospitals, and 25% of all the social infrastructure facilities have been built by the investors, and I would like to extend my gratitude to our investors. So when we deal with the comprehensive development projects, 25% of all the social facilities are built by the private investors. We continue to deal with the renovation of the sports facilities, getting prepared for the World Cup. We have already hosted the Confederation Cup matches, and 3 international stadiums which comply with all international standards have been built. In June, we finished the construction of Luzhniki Stadium. This is our main sports field, which will host the final games of the World Cup in 2018. Apart from the stadium, we built 250 hectares of a park around the stadium. We're also building 2 more stadiums, Dynamo, and 11 more training football fields for the teens, and once we celebrate the World Cup, we will retain those facilities for the kids. So we are renovating the parking spaces, and in 2018-2019, 8 more parking zones would be built. The embankments are being upgraded this year. Near Kremlin, we're going to commission one of the most complicated and interesting parks in the very center of the city, Zaryadye Park, with certain underground facilities with a territory of about 70 hectares. And we plan that more than 4 million people will visit it annually. The volume of investments is focused at the level of about $1 billion, and this park is going to be launched next year. And certainly, I would like to say a few words about the new large-scale project which we are launching. This is the renovation of housing. We have 240 million square meters of housing, and 25 out of them are quite shabby, quite dilapidated. That's why, upon considering the applications from the residents, we're going to demolish about 25 million square meters of dilapidated housing, and we're going to build twice as much of housing and commercial facilities. We will resettle, move people from the shabby, dilapidated houses to the new ones, which will comply with the state-of-the-art comfort standards. This year, we are already preparing to move people to the new houses. And the mayor told us not just to build the houses, but to build a new high-quality standard of living, to provide for the accessibility, transparency, connectivity, to improve the social infrastructure, to provide for beautification of the territory around. So this is a very serious challenge, and we hope very much that this Urban Forum will help us to find solutions to the questions which are on our mind. All our renovation programs are interconnected with each other. In order to implement them, we certainly have to concentrate all the necessary resources, not just the financial ones, but energy resources of the people too. That's why we do believe that today's session, today's forum, this is one step forward to promote our renovation programs for the city. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Husnulin. You gave us a big picture of the renovation in all the directions. Friends, it's very difficult to be a moderator, actually. We have 60 minutes allocated for 9 presentations, and you can divide this figure on your own, but the main idea is just please be brief, be concise, so that we could have some Q&A session too. Now, let us start with our guest from Japan. Mr. Ayama, as far as I know, in Japan there are clear-cut rules which govern as to how often we have to renew the housing or renovate the housing, but at the same time this is not capital. How do you provide for the balance between retaining your historical outlook, retaining certain traditions, but at the same time do certain renovations, introduce some new housing? What's the balance? What's the approach?
My name is Yasu Shaoyama. I will talk about formation of urban access in metropolitan development. Tokyo has a quarter of the power of Japan due to its agglomeration. Next slide, please. By agglomeration in Tokyo, we can produce higher GDP than New York and London. Next, please. Tokyo has been expanding for over 300 years. It was necessary to decentralize Tokyo's urban functions. And next, please. The result was a proposal in 1986 to correct the centralized single-nucleus urban structure through multi-center urban design. Next, please. We changed the policy from the multiple urban center design policy to the diverse urban communities within the ring road, forming megalopolis urban structure in 1995. The urban structure of Tokyo's city center has changed significantly in recent years. Looking at the agglomeration situation by the total floor space, it becomes as follows. Next, please. Areas of development that stand out since moving into the 21st century make up a central axis of Akasaka Roppongi, moving into Toranomon Shimbashi, Shiodome, and extending to Takeshiba. Next, please. In these urban axis groups, housing floor area increased by 54.5% in the 20 years from 1991 to 2011. Promotion of urban center residents in Tokyo now supports the development of the city center. The number of households in Tokyo's 23 wards is over 4 million, but the number of houses reaches over 5 million. Social and affordable housing account for 6.5% of the total number of houses. There is opposition from the local people against redevelopment. However, in order to improve the environment of people living, it's important to persuade persistently and cooperatively. In all cases, planning that focuses on a comprehensive list of items such as welfare, education, housing, environment, and economy has replaced the traditional philosophy of city creation alone in urban planning. When building the low-rise public housing to that of middle and high-rise buildings, it's also effective to revitalize cities by renting the site and volume resulting from this to private housing companies and increasing the number of houses for the middle class. In Tokyo, we are updating public housing one after another in this way. By this method, it's possible to increase the number of private housing units newly without reducing the number of public housing units. There were times when we promoted policies to train secondary city centers because the functions of business and commercials were concentrated to the city center. It's finished.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. On Tokyo, we have another speaker, Fadi Jabri. So apart from some general comments, maybe you could clarify, maybe, did I get it right, that they have about 3 million square meters of new residential area over the past 10 years? In Moscow, I think they had 19 million square meters over 20 years. It's another big figure. So is there a renovation project of a similar size to Moscow, or is it different from what they're doing in Moscow?
Вы говорите о новом жилье или...
Are you talking about new renovation? Yes, I guess this is a very large-scale program in Japan. I can give you a few examples. So let's take a look at my presentation. We stay with Tokyo. This is the Dojinkai, the first generation of mass housing units in 1930s, 1940s. About 16 complexes. They're no longer there. They have all been renovated. Here's a vivid example of that. Omota Sando has been converted into an interesting shopping center, but there's just one piece of this building left as a monument to the past. You can see it at the bottom right on the right-hand side. The second wave of mass living houses in Japan, this is in 1950s after the war, over 20,000 units every year. A lot of stock built all over Japan. This was a government organization, Judo Tukodo. It's similar to what you had in Russia at the time. And much of this stock is dilapidated and requires renovation, reconstruction. They even have certain examples, buildings built by famous architects, like the one you see on this slide. You see this old building? It was designed by this architect, and this is new housing units. Very nice landscaping. So this building was converted into the tower that's sold and rented. This is a nice project. It's a large neighborhood. At the top, you can see what it looked like in the 1970s. This must look familiar to you. A lot of cookie cutter buildings and the shopping center nearby. And this is what it looks like today. It's called Harami Triton Square. It looks totally new. At the bottom, you can see 3 high towers. These are office buildings, so they changed the function of the building. And between them, there's a concert hall, so it's an element of culture. And then there's a shopping mall that looks very beautiful, has a very nice landscaping solution, and a ramp that connects all the buildings, so you can go through the office buildings, through the lobby, through the concert hall, to the landscaping area, and there are no cars there. You can go to the residential area. This is a new approach to residential areas. And what I showed you before is in the central part of the city, so there's a demand there for offices, office spaces. This is similar to New Moscow. Density is much lower there, but again, those buildings are old and they need to be renovated. So there is an example. Well, the former example was a government organization using a private company and working together on a large project. This was not renovation, this was redevelopment. This second example, you can see a private company rebuilding old buildings and producing new, nice areas improving the quality of life. So I gave you 3 examples how this works in Tokyo. You see what the government can do, what private companies do, and you see these nice projects. I think this is an important page in the history of Moscow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the pictures. What about, so are we talking about expansion, not just expansion, also redevelopment of existing neighborhoods, right? So what about moving people from an old building to a new building? Are there any lessons we can learn? What does Moscow have to remember about when? I think patience and time is what you need, because it's a long process. Mr. Aoyama showed us this Romponing Hills. This is a very nice project, and it took the developer 20 years to gather all the lands there. You are fortunate here in Moscow because you have large land plots. You don't have as many owners. In Tokyo, land plots are very small, so it's very hard. It takes decades to purchase all the land you need. Okay, another city that's closer to Moscow, Paris. Moscow often learned from Paris in terms of development. So, Maurice Leroy, my question to you is, what about new housing, how it affects Paris? Yeah, we picked up very nice speed, quick speed, so let's keep going fast. Hello? Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Moscow mayor, Mr. Sobyanin, for the invitation to come to this forum. And I can tell you that actually back in 2011 I was here as the Minister for Paris Development, so this is not my first time here at this forum. Thank you for inviting me this time again. I would like to thank the organizers for excellent organization at the forum. I'm very happy to be here together with a large delegation from France. And we have Emmanuel Forest and Mr. Gernot here and my other colleagues. And this is a very important it's very important to be here at the very center of this forum, because together with my colleagues from Tokyo and other cities, we can present our projects. And for example, I can show you what we have in Paris. Paris is a huge global agglomeration. And we are here at VDN Hall. This is a very nice, beautiful park. And I have to say that this is not just a residential area. Actually, what we have here is a combination of the city and the man. As regards Paris, I have to say that my colleague presented a large plan of urban renovation in Paris that transformed city neighborhoods a lot. It's much more dynamic now, and social life has become much richer now. This is similar to what happened in Tokyo, but we were able to revamp our social life. We paid special attention to this in Renovating Paris. This plan has been implemented over 10 years. It enabled us to cover 490 neighborhoods, 4 million people, and 12 billion euros were spent in subsidies for the renovation program. 12 billion euros spent on renovation, redevelopment. This created a lot of jobs, and I should also say that 90% of the people said they were satisfied with the renovation program, because we did a poll among the residents. So we can see that this project was really successful. Consequently, in addition to the Greater Paris project, we continued working. There is a bill we adopted in 2010, and we plan, based on this bill, we plan to build a lot of new residential complexes. There will be a total of 1,060,000 new complexes in Paris and around Paris. So this renovation program was highly successful, and I would also say that the renovation program that's currently taking place in Moscow is also highly successful. Of course, there is a human element to it. Architects, designers, when they adopt a plan to renovate a city, they pay special attention to the man. The man is always at the center of these changes. I think it's extremely important because people really want to live in this city, in this neighborhood. And we really need to pay special attention to this. Quite often when we seek to improve a neighborhood, there is always somebody who's unhappy, so we should always listen to people living there. We should really improve the quality of their lives. We need a combination. We need to improve the city and improve the living standards for the people as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do think that the fact that the people have to be in the central focus of all our policy is a matter actually of discussing the Moscow policies. What about Beijing? This is another example or potential sorts of conclusions or lessons. Mr. Liu Zhunliang, can you tell us about the approach of Beijing to that problem? Esteemed Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for me to participate in our today's Urban Forum and to speak to you from this panel. I'd like to thank the Vice Mayor of Moscow for hospitality and excellent organization of this event. And now I'd like to make a few bullet points about the experience of renovations of dilapidated housing in Beijing. I would like to be rather brief. Beijing, this is a city with the 3,000 years history. For 860 years, it's been the capital of China. Beijing has been always developing very fast, especially since recently. The total area of housing is about 800 million square meters. Over the last 5 years, we built a lot of social housing and flats for sale, which may house about 6 million people, and also we have built the quake-resistant apartments, and therefore a lot of people could get housing of certain living standards. Beijing, just like many other major cities and megacities, run into common problems, and this is also about the quality of the rural environment, city environment. And in order to make Beijing compliant with the world standards, a lot of efforts have to be made. We do our best that the city and the government could provide certain subsidies that the most needing layers of the population could afford certain housing. And besides, we are making certain differentiation in terms of the housing which we're providing. We do think that social and municipal housing should take certain stake, and the second stake are to be the flats for sale. Besides, as a city which is the mix of traditional and the modern features, we are renovating the dilapidated housing stock. There are two types of obsolete houses in Beijing. First of all, the densely populated areas, such flats which were built until the 1990s, and the square is about 70 million square meters. Historically, this housing stock has become obsolete and dilapidated. This is how we are developing further types of houses, and we pay special attention to building energy-efficient houses, and we are focusing on improving the energy saving of the existing houses. We're improving the services which we're offering to the people. Speaking about another type of our activity, another part of our obsolete housing stock, this is the historical part of the city, which hosts traditional flats which exist for more than 300 years, and certainly we are to improve the quality of living there for the residents who are living there in the downtown, but at the same time we don't want to ruin the historical outlook. We are conferring in our residents, we are launching certain discussions. This is the key factor behind the success of the renovation program. We try to strengthen structurally the houses, make them quake resistant, make them energy efficient, and at the same time we improve the traditional types of houses. Besides, we try to replace the coal-run burners with the electric furnaces, and we provide better water supply, thus providing for microcirculation in the tiny streets and side streets of the old city. One case I would like to boast. In Beijing, just like it has been mentioned about Tokyo and other cities, Beijing is doing renovations on large scale. And as far as I'm the only lady in the panel, I'd like to tell you about a different case. This case was carried out in the historical part of the city. You probably heard about Yuan. This is the traditional type of buildings of houses when four houses make a kind of a yard inside, so they kind of surround the yard. Usually those districts or hutongs, they are very densely populated, and this is what we call obsolete housing. And if we look at one of such hutongs or districts which is celebrating this year its 700th anniversary, it should be mentioned then when we did the renovation of this district, we set up a special association to protect the heritage of Shitia Hutun, of this district. We enjoyed the subsidies from the government, or rather under the aegis of the government we held a number of discussions and certain events. One of such events was called Our Yard, or Courtyard. Together with the residents of that district, we comprehensively discussed all the issues. We're trying to coordinate all the opinions and to develop our common position, common stance. As a result, you can see on the pictures how the outlook of those districts changed, that everything is more tidy. cleaner, and the real effect from the renovation could not be overestimated. It was absolutely satisfying for the local residents, and the residents of the neighboring districts also opted for the renovation of their khutons or districts. We tried to set up certain exhibitions in those renovated khutons or districts in order to help people protect their historical heritage. Besides, we all the time study the new experience, and based on that, we arrange for different platforms to exchange opinions in order to improve the urban environment in the historical districts or khutons. Now we launched a new round of negotiations in order to promote new pieces of legislation. Hopefully it will help us to make Beijing a city which will encompass all types of residents and thus providing affordable and convenient housing for everyone. I hope very much that you will eventually visit Beijing and feel the changes which are taking place in the city. Welcome to Beijing. Thank you so much. Really, all the cases were amazing, very interesting. So the life goes on and the time goes on and everyone manages to find certain mechanisms for upgrading and renovation. Let us get back to our Russian context. And before we focus on the lessons and conclusions for Moscow, before we speak about priority, I would like to turn to Alexander Plutnik with a kind of a double-sided question. First, Moscow constructs a lot. Moscow has money, Moscow has construction workers, it has vision, it has a team which moves forward. This is obvious. But at the same time, the houses are to be built around the country. What should be done in other regions? What lessons could be learned from the Russian mega project? And how you fund the renovation projects there in the regions. And the second question about Moscow. This shift, you said that eventually more than 1 million people could be moved to other flats outside the city. What will happen to the housing market? Will it actually somehow boost the mortgage lending or not? So this is actually the question both about the Russian regions and about the future of the housing market. Can I please have the 16th slide of Mr. Khusnulin's presentation, so that this is a unique project where we're speaking to the mic, please. So we see that a lot of Asian and European projects also carried out a lot of large-scale redevelopment or renovation projects. Whatever you call it, what matters is the result, what the residents get. Besides, there is the OECD organization which has a list of principles which are applicable for world capitals with different density, with different number of population. And these development principles for the urban territories are fully complied with slide number 16 from Mr. Khusnulin's presentation. That's why I'd like to be backed by it. So I do think that the local authorities decided not just to do the renovation of the quarters, living quarters. On that slide you see not only the new houses being built, and unfortunately not all the regions of Russia are using the construction standards which are being used by Moscow. New standards for the balconies, for the windows, for the entrances, and the quarter itself, living quarter itself, is the logical extension of your flat. So meaning that you get a new, modern and diverse, high-quality urban environment. All these projects, all these principles are described by the OECD. And one of the main principles about the compact approach to the development of the city. Moscow is home to more than 16 million people, and there are a lot of commuters and migrants who are unregistered, and the people who we see in the streets, they look absolutely differently. And for instance, if you want to take your children for a walk to the new parks, you will see just crowds of people, many of whom come to the downtown from the outskirts. So they come to Gorky Park, to BDNK exhibition premises. So this polycentric development principle highlighted by Mr. Khrushchev was the one which will result in better comfort in the living quarters in the outskirts. It means that the people will not have to go to the other side of the city or to the downtown in order to get better quality of living or entertainment or culture. And this will provide for better connectivity of the streets, and the pedestrian accessibility of certain venues will change. This will build a new quality of the urban environment. And when Mr. Oreshkin, the Minister for Economic Development, spoke at the opening of the plenary session, he compared the economies and the urban environment. And our colleague from Paris may tell everyone what happened to Saint-Denis, the outskirts of Paris. This was the territory of slums, and if you go there now, this is a modern quarter with a lot of offices, with convenient and affordable housing. What our colleagues from Beijing said, when renovating the territory, you have to allocate certain parts, certain stock of flats and apartments as affordable as social housing. So the developers or the state has to build certain housing for certain categories of the people, for the most vulnerable one. And this is actually absolutely a norm that even in the most fashionable and the most expensive districts, you still allocate certain houses or certain blocks of flat for the most vulnerable people to avoid segregation of people in terms of their income. A few words about funding. Every week I have to visit certain constituted members of the Russian Federation in my current capacity, and the local authorities and the developers. They all would like to actually enjoy the Moscow context, Moscow situation. And this is about the legislative power, about the financial power, and actually no one had such power, and now Moscow is the strongest constituted member of the Russian Federation. I'm sure that it will succeed in implementing this big Moscow project, but still we'll have to adapt for the changes. After that, this experience might be replicated in other cities, in other regions, in the biggest ones, for instance, and then it could be replicated in the capitals of the regions. So this will result in the new living quality of the Russian cities. Thank you so much. Actually, this question, we are going to build new comprehensive districts which will encompass the ecosystem. Are there any sites for that, or we are going to build certain blocks of flat or houses where it could be done? I'd like to turn to Mr. Adabashin. You said that there are going to be some new facilities. Are they going to be planned or designed somehow? Are there certain land plots allocated for them, or these are just targeted solutions in the areas where there is just enough site for 1 or 2 houses, because actually in Paris, in Beijing, and Tokyo, the renovation was large scale. What is going to take place in Moscow? Since end of 1990s, since late 1990s, we are renovating the whole districts, and the biggest design bureaus have enriched their experience about what is going to do. So, meaning that we are not reinventing the wheel, we are not actually working from scratch. In early 1990s, there was no even an idea to do anything like that, and I joined the feedback from the grassroots, from common people. Actually, we now have this experience, and when certain reports were made at the plenary session about certain cities, actually, I rejoiced the fact that Moscow is #1 in terms of some innovative solutions, or at least is not lagging behind some of the international leaders. And what Mr. Husnulin said, we are providing for the transparency of the transport communication, so people may walk or ride a bicycle. So there is certain experience, but what about the land plots for that? In equally important areas, for instance, do we have enough land plots for that? Yes, absolutely. A lot has been said about the post-industrial areas and the experience accumulated by the local authorities. Therefore, we may balance the situation and resettle the people within the districts they used to live. And I would like to add also what we would like to have. We have very experienced, very nice designers who learn from the foreigners. We have enough construction workers. Look at the quality of the construction materials. So the construction industry is supplied almost 90% of the construction materials made in Russia, and we have to set up industrial parks. So we do not focus a lot on the industry. Well, usually when the economy is not growing rapidly, a lot of countries start the infrastructural projects. This was done in Germany, in China, and even in the United States. In that sense, we are not doing a lot about that on the average, and the Moscow case is an exception, because it's obvious that this construction is not just about construction materials and jobs, but also about the competence centers. I have a question to Alexei Muratov, partner from Strelka.
Strelka thinks and talks a lot about proper city environment. So this is another opportunity to create a proper environment. Of course, this can be quite painful and complex process. What do you think about that? Yes, thank you very much for your question, Yermolai. Right now, we work together with the mortgage agency. We develop recommendations for forming proper city environment. Let me give you a few figures. We need 2 principles in Moscow. Number 1, to preserve everything, all the best that we have. And all the best means 2 things. First, humane scale of 5-story building neighborhoods, and more experts think that buildings should be between 5 to 9 stories. This is the most comfortable environment for people. And many cities like Toronto, for example, have adopted regulations where they limit construction to 9 stories. Certain parts of Russia have introduced similar regulations. Number 2, we need a lot of greenery. A certain number of square meters per person. Okay, what else do we need? We need to make this environment truly urban. We should have a proper city, a diverse and compact city. This is what Mr. Plutnik talked about. Mixed use is the basic principle. At least 30% should be mixed use. How do we do that? First, we should limit the size of neighborhoods. If it should be under 2 hectares, no more than 180 meters long. 50 to 70% of construction should be along the opposite sides of the neighborhood, and street retail should occupy the ground floor again, 4 to 5 meters high. Transparency should be about 70%. This creates a truly urban environment. All this can be expressed in figures. So what Moscow should do is they should say, we have been destroying the city throughout the 20th century. We've been building slums and neighborhoods for sleeping, dormitories, you might say. So let's make Moscow a comfortable city for living now. We should make Moscow more compact and diverse. This is the locomotive of the modern economy. This is what we should be doing today. Okay, thank you. When you say compact, I think you mean a proper balance between jobs, retail, greenery. Well, if you say you need 30% of mixed use, you will never be able to achieve this goal with just retail. And landscaping will provide you with proper public spaces. Okay, thank you. I would now like to turn to Sergei Choban, architect. Sergei, what do you think about this project? Thank you, Yermolai. Well, this is a large-scale project. I can talk about it from the viewpoint of the project they had in Germany in the 1990s, in East Germany, especially in Berlin. And I agree with what Alexei Dobashin just said. What Moscow has done puts Moscow among the world leaders in terms of preparing proper infrastructure. And what Marat Husnulin said, there is an excellent public transport network, the metro. We've always known that the metro is a nice transport system, and new stations, they also look nice. This is equally important. We used to be proud of our old historic stations, but new stations designed by young Russian architects, they also look great. This is number one. Number two, what Alexei said is multifunctional projects that combine jobs, sports, culture, like Spartak Stadium in Tushino or the Hermitage Center in Moscow, at Zil Art. These are major, large-scale projects. They are a vivid example of what such neighborhoods should look like. And the third very important factor is large parks, Moscow embankments. There was a huge tender, so the first few embankments are done, like the one at Tzedekha. I recently helped shoot a documentary, and I brought the director to this place, and he was really, really impressed. He said, I never knew that Moscow had such a wonderful place. A lot of people there, and great acceptance for these public spaces. So this is a very good foundation that we have here in Moscow, and now we launch this renovation project. I think the success of this project will depend on a few factors, and actually these factors have already been mentioned by other speakers. Number one, what we all hate. Okay, let's be honest here. When we see those neighborhoods being renovated, what we hate is that public spaces are not appealing at all. There is no social control on the ground floor. What I mean is, as you walk past the facade of the building, you should not feel alone. You should be looking at shop windows. You should be able to see where public space is and where private space is. This is why we love historic old cities. You know, I have a saying, we build the cities of a certain kind, and then we like to travel to cities of other kind. We build cities with apartments on the ground floor, and this doesn't look so nice. Instead of seeing nice shop windows, we have living quarters there. So we need public spaces where our kids can go out for a walk and you can watch your kid. You should have all the advantages of having a yard, having a nice street outside, public space for people. Number two, what Alexei said, the number of stories in one building. We should insist at least 70% of new apartment complexes should be 7 floors on average. This is humane. This is why we like historic cities, because they don't have buildings that are too high. There should be a limit of 30 meters from top to bottom. This is about 7 to 8 floors. I think this is humane. I think this is proper. With the remaining 30%, you can have high-risers. That's okay. That's acceptable. This can also be part of the modern cities. But most of the buildings should be limited in the number of stories. This is what why people protest today. People live in those 5-story buildings. They like living in a building with 5 stories, a lot of greenery, small number of floors. This is what 5-story neighborhoods have today, and this is something we should preserve. And another important factor is facade solutions. We don't want to walk along facades that all look the same, looking for entrance 5. Like in this old Russian movie, remember, all buildings look the same. If they're long, if those buildings are huge, there is no facade, you might say. To me, a house is just your entrance. You know how to get to your apartment, and every entrance has individual design, and every entrance is unique. This is very important. Your house should not be a huge building with lots of entrances. It's just your 25 meters. Your building should be only 25 meters long, no more, and should be unique. And all those buildings should be able to age gracefully, you might say, because all those 5-story buildings, they look terrible. The only thing that looks nice about them is the bushes, the greenery that grows around plants. So if you look at those buildings, not for the rich people, for the middle class and low income buildings in St. Petersburg, they still look nice, those buildings in St. Petersburg, after 100 years. So I agree with Alexei. This is the way we should develop. We should develop a local construction industry. This will enable us to build such buildings cheaply. And of course, people who will live in those neighborhoods should be the same people who live in renovated areas. We don't need gentrification. This is what all people are afraid of. They're afraid of rich people moving in. They're afraid of gentrification. We should avoid that. And if we do all that, I think this project will be highly successful. I saw a lot of reactions. I think Alexander wanted to comment. I would like to add just one word. I agree with Sergey, but there is another thing you have to consider. When you start a renovation project, when you turn a neighborhood and you limit construction to 7 floors, you should also remember something else. You should make it dense. You should not be afraid of dense construction. If you limit it to 7 floors and greenery. Last year I had a meeting with the Singapore Urban Development Ministry, and they really impressed us when you go to Singapore, you see new neighborhoods. Then a year later you come, you see more new neighborhoods. And they told us, we are not going to build any more parks in the city. We have abandoned this principle. We didn't get it. We waited for them to finish. We were really amazed. They said, we'll build a city inside a park. So they want to turn the entire city environment into a park. Once you exit your building, you are surrounded by greenery. So that's one more point I wanted to mention. Well, to put it mildly, we have plenty of land in Russia, unlike Singapore, so we don't have the same challenges they do. Well, if we want to have better human capital, we should use the land we have in our cities in a smart way. Yes, this is the central idea here. This is what we started with and what Sergei said and what Alexander said in his comment. We need to know what people want. People from different social classes, from different groups, what Muscovites who live in Moscow today want, what people who will live in Moscow in a few years want. If we want to go really international, what should we do about Moscow so that Europeans would want to come to Moscow? Make it more appealing to Moscow than other European cities. This is a goal that we should aspire to. Of course, you may also ask, what about Moscow province? We have Moscow province around Moscow. Certain people may want to move to some new places outside Moscow with nice communication routes to Moscow. We have one speaker left. I would like to ask Christos Passos, a design director from Zaha Hadid Architects. Christos, I think your company plans to offer its concept certain solutions for the renovation. So tell us about it.
Thank you for the invitation to speak at this conference today. Mr. Deputy Mayor, dear moderator, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by setting some of our preoccupations, if you like, in this proposition. And we start by appreciating that the drive to modernization means that we have to find a collective and individual ways to improve our way of living. Our living conditions are very important. They reflect who we are, and they reflect what we also want to be. So a lot of the essence of this discussion is all about quality. It's about building safe, comfortable housing, and to not be afraid to replenish whatever has lived its course by taking into account ecological considerations, and of course taking into account technological concerns and the changing world environment. Many speakers today have spoken about the need for cities to be and to remain attractive both to its own citizens and also to people from overseas, because migratory flows are going to be one of the most standard conditions of the new century. So attracting this capital and looking into the conditions, I think the first thing is that would make Moscow attractive is if Muscovites themselves like their city. I don't want to be prescriptive in what should be done. Rather, I would like to propose that the possibilities are infinite here, and there is a possibility to develop a city that has variable densities, starting from the small flat gardens that exist between buildings to 2- or 3-story townhouses with windows similar to what one finds, for example, in Amsterdam, to 6 or 7 or 8 or 10-story buildings that we find in beautiful Paris, to 15, 20, 30-story buildings that we see in other denser metropolises. And I think it's possible to also develop solutions where all those beautiful things that we like on the ground floor, the children playgrounds, the gardens, the greenery, moves up with the scale of the buildings into the upper levels. We've tested some of these proposals. It's entirely possible to build green buildings with hanging gardens, with other things. And the main important thing here is to develop solutions that propose a rich mix, not a mixed use solution which becomes almost like a cliche nowadays, but a rich mix of diversity, of different conditions, of ease, access, and multiplicities that allow these cities to really be engaging for the people who live here permanently and for those who visit. So our proposition would be that, of course, things need to be studied carefully, but we also must not be afraid of what the future will bring.
Спасибо.
Thank you, thank you. Well, so 100 years we'll mark 100 years since the October Revolution this year. 100 years ago, people decided to build a new world, and now we decided to turn Moscow into a new city. But the important idea here is that the man should be at the center of everything we do. This should be our compass in everything we do. I'm very happy that all of our speakers were brief, listen, and we were able to finish on time. So in conclusion, I would ask you, Mr. Husnuling, to give an overview of this session, and this will conclude, and we'll be able to stop at 6:30 as we were supposed to. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank all of our speakers today. I would like to thank you all for coming to our forum, for taking part in this discussion. Actually, the renovation program is really huge. The housing renovation program alone will have to learn from Beijing in preserving old historic buildings. The central part of the city, we will not demolish them, we will reconstruct them, so we will rely on Beijing experience. In certain places, we'll demolish 5-story buildings, and the new buildings will also be only 5 stories high because we shouldn't build taller buildings there. In certain areas, we'll build the buildings of 8 to 14 stories because we also need to consider economic factors. We need to create a mechanism. You know, when we launch this huge program, we need to have enough money to finish this program. So we need to strike the proper balance between architectural and economic interests. And of course, we will learn a lot from our colleagues in Tokyo, in Japan, because Tokyo has old historic buildings and new buildings alike, new transport hubs, and Tokyo has high concentration of real estate around transport routes. So in our renovation program, we will also learn from Tokyo, and we will also learn from Paris. The experience of Paris really means a lot. Maurice Leroy taught us a lot of things about larger areas. We've been working together for 7 years now. We studied together how to renovate housing, what they did in Paris. Of course, we will also rely on the mortgage agency. This is also a very important organization. People should be able to purchase new housing, and this would be impossible without organizations like the mortgage agency. So again, this is another important driver. They will be our reliable partner, the mortgage agency, and we really work very closely with them. All of our architects, international architects, Russian architects, we invite everybody to come and bring their expertise, their knowledge, their skills to help us with this large-scale project in Moscow. We really want to make life comfortable for millions of people living here. We want to make this city appealing so people would want to come to Moscow, live here, work here, and this session was one more step in this direction. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Organizers asked me to make one announcement. Here in the same room, there will be a plenary interview at 7:30, The Age of Agglomeration, with Ken Livingston, former mayor of London, and Demyan Kudryavtsev of Vedomosti newspaper will be a moderator at 7:30 here. So once again, thank you all very much for this discussion. Thank you.